The largest diamond in this story could not secure an heir. The smallest ring survived the fall of an empire and later sold for 730,000 euros. And a princess whose first marriage had failed accepted another sapphire without blaming the stone for anything. These are not stories about cursed jewels. They are stories about beautiful promises colliding with politics, distance, infidelity, and human choice, and about the unexpected second lives these rings began after the fairy tales ended. Before we begin, please support my channel by clicking on the like and subscribe buttons. Thank you. Let's begin with perhaps the most recognizable piece of jewelry in the world, Princess Diana's sapphire ring. When 19-year-old Lady Diana Spencer became engaged to Prince Charles in 1981, she selected her own ring from the House of Gerard. It is a stunning piece, an oval, 12-carat Ceylon sapphire surrounded by 14 round diamonds set in 18-carat white gold. Because this exact model was featured in Gerard's catalog and could technically be purchased by any wealthy client, a myth later emerged that the royal family was irritated by its lack of exclusivity. People often say that Charles was somehow careless for not commissioning a unique, custom design for his future bride. But honestly, I don't see anything wrong with it at all. I actually love the fact that Diana simply chose what she genuinely liked, and she wore it with such obvious pleasure. Yet, while the ring itself was a beautiful promise, the emotional reality was far more complicated. Do you remember their official engagement television interview? When the reporter asked if they were in love, Charles famously replied, "Whatever in love means." Looking back, theirs is such a deeply complex story. On the outside, everything looked like the ultimate fairy tale, but behind closed doors, things were clearly not so rosy. I always want to be quite careful when talking about their marriage because it was so deeply intricate. But that early contrast between the sparkling visual image and the emotional reality is hard to ignore. The grand wedding was followed by years of public struggles, leading up to the Prime Minister's announcement of their separation in 1992, and finally their divorce on August 28, 1996. Diana lost the style of Her Royal Highness, though she retained the title of Diana, Princess of Wales, and she threw herself into her charitable work. But what happened to her jewelry? You might have seen the press frequently refer to her large, emerald-cut aquamarine by Asprey as her divorce ring, framing it as a direct replacement for her sapphire. It sounds like a great story of defiance, but the actual timeline tells us something completely different. In reality, on the very day her divorce was finalized, Diana was photographed still wearing her sapphire engagement ring. The aquamarine, which was a gift from her close friend Lucia Flecha de Lima, made its first public appearance later, in October 1996, at an event in Sydney. But even after debuting this new stone, she didn't pack the sapphire away. In December of that same year, she chose to wear the sapphire engagement ring again to the Met Gala. Then, in the summer of 1997, she went back to the aquamarine for the famous Christie's dress auction reception. So, while it is very tempting to look at the aquamarine as a symbol of her new, independent life, it never actually replaced her engagement sapphire. She simply alternated them. To me, this shows a very healthy, practical approach. The divorce ring label is just a media invention created later on. She didn't use the aquamarine to banish her past. She just had beautiful rings, and she wore both of them. Eventually, both of these blue stones found their way to the next generation. Diana wasn't the only royal bride of the 1980s who found herself navigating life and her jewelry box after a highly public divorce in 1996. There was another couple whose story started with so much promise and a very different, vibrant stone. Sarah Ferguson and Prince Andrew had actually known each other since childhood, moving in the same polo and royal circles. However, their romance truly sparked in the mid-1980s, famously encouraged by Diana herself. They were often described as a boisterous, fun-loving pair, bringing a much-needed sense of lightness and energy to the royal family. When Andrew decided to propose on his 26th birthday in February 1986, the mood was incredibly optimistic. He didn't just select a historical piece from a vault. Instead, he worked directly with Gerard to sketch out a design. He presented Sarah with a beautiful oval Burmese ruby weighing around 3 carats, surrounded by 10 diamond petals. The floral design was a subtle nod to royal tradition, but the bold red stone was entirely personal. Sarah later explained that the ruby was chosen specifically to complement her signature red hair. It was a ring that felt joyful and full of life, perfectly matching the public's high expectations for their energetic partnership. When they married at Westminster Abbey a few months later, Sarah walked down the aisle wearing a romantic wreath of gardenias. It was only after signing the register that the flowers were removed to reveal the York diamond tiara. I want to briefly mention this piece because it wasn't a temporary loan from the royal collection. It was a personal wedding gift from Queen Elizabeth II and Prince Philip. But the laughter and optimism of those early days soon collided with a harsh reality. Andrew's extensive naval career meant he was away at sea for months at a time. Sarah was left largely alone to face the relentless, often cruel scrutiny of the British tabloids. The prolonged separations and intense public pressure eventually led to a series of highly publicized scandals, including photographs of Sarah with other men. The marriage essentially collapsed under the weight of it all, leading to a formal separation in 1992 and a final divorce in 1996. Because her tiara was a personal gift, it remained hers. But what I find far more fascinating is the fate of her engagement ring. Long after the divorce was finalized, Sarah was photographed still wearing her ruby. We saw it on her hand during family outings in 2000, and even at a book launch in 2003, 7 years after her marriage officially ended. It shows that an engagement ring doesn't automatically turn into a cursed object when a marriage ends. Sometimes, it just remains a beautiful part of your personal story. To me, it is completely normal. It is a stunningly beautiful ring, and if she genuinely likes it and it doesn't trigger painful memories, why shouldn't she wear it? The marriage itself didn't survive, but Sarah and Andrew defied all royal conventions by remaining incredibly close friends and devoted co-parents to Beatrice and Eugenie. They even continued to live under the same roof at Royal Lodge. Speaking of rubies, they aren't always chosen just to match a bride's personal style or hair color. Sometimes, they are carefully selected to represent the heart of an entire nation. In 1994, Alexandra Manley, a highly successful business executive from Hong Kong, met a young Danish man at a private dinner. She later admitted that she had absolutely no idea at first that she was speaking to Prince Joachim, the younger son of Queen Margrethe II of Denmark. Their romance quietly blossomed, and during a private holiday in the Philippines, Joachim proposed. When they officially announced their engagement in May 1995, the world finally got a close look at the ring. Set in classic yellow gold, a large central diamond was flanked by 2 round cabochon rubies. It wasn't just a beautiful 3-stone design. The red and white gems were a direct, deliberate tribute to the colors of the Danish flag. I find this to be such a profoundly touching, poetic gesture from the prince. He wasn't just offering his heart. He was quite literally placing the colors of his country on her finger, promising this brilliant woman from Hong Kong that Denmark would be her new, welcoming homeland. And for a long time, it truly was. Alexandra embraced her new life completely. She learned the famously difficult Danish language with astonishing speed, and quickly became one of the most popular and beloved figures within the monarchy. When they married at Frederiksborg Castle, Queen Margrethe gave her the delicate Alexandrine diamond drop tiara. With 2 sons and a packed schedule of charitable work, theirs looked like the absolute perfect modern royal fairy tale. But as we know, even the most beautifully designed promises cannot foresee the future. In September 2004, the Danish court shocked the public by announcing the couple's separation. It was an absolute earthquake for the monarchy. To put it in perspective, this was the first Danish royal divorce since 1846. Nearly 160 years of unbroken marital tradition within the royal house came to a sudden, very public halt. The fairy tale had quietly unspooled. Because the Alexandrian tiara was a personal gift, Alexandra kept it, taking it with her as she transitioned into her new, independent life as the Countess of Frederiksborg. But as for that striking red and white engagement ring, it largely faded from public view after the split. To me, it remains a rather poignant reminder of how a story can begin with so much hope. A ring can promise you a new country, the love of a prince, and a royal life, but it simply cannot guarantee a happy ending. Sometimes a ring is meant to promise a new country. But what happens when an engagement carries the weight of an entire empire? The Shah of Iran, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, knew the heavy cost of royal expectations all too well. He already knew the price of a purely political marriage. His first wife, Princess Fawzia of Egypt, was presented with an extraordinary diamond parure by Van Cleef and Arpels for their wedding in 1939. It was a staggering piece of cold, glittering geometry featuring 54 pear-shaped diamonds and over 500 baguette-cut stones. But that massive display of state wealth couldn't buy happiness or comfort. Feeling deeply isolated in Tehran, the princess eventually left the marriage and returned to Egypt. So, when the Shah decided to marry again, it was meant to be entirely different. This time, it was for love. He chose a beautiful young woman named Soraya, and to mark their engagement, he presented her with a ring that almost defies description. It was a Harry Winston creation, featuring an emerald-cut diamond weighing an astonishing 22.37 carats. When I look at this massive stone, I don't just see a heavy, impractical display of wealth. I genuinely see it as a symbol of the Shah's sincere generosity and his immense love for her. He clearly wanted to impress her, to show her that he was absolutely ready to place the world at her feet. Setting practicality aside, I think any woman would be thrilled to receive such a mesmerizingly beautiful ring. It was a sweeping, romantic gesture that promised a magnificent life together. But as we have seen so many times, even a 22-carat diamond cannot resolve a crisis of state. They were married for 7 years, and in that time, Soraya was unable to provide an heir to the throne. The pressure from the state was immense, and ultimately, the marriage had to be sacrificed. In March 1958, the Shah made a devastating, trembling radio broadcast to the nation, announcing their divorce. It was framed as a deeply painful personal sacrifice made entirely for the future of his country. Soraya left Iran for Europe, keeping her royal title and her personal jewelry, including that magnificent Harry Winston diamond. After living out her life away from the Persian court, she passed away in Paris in 2001. A year later, her estate went up for auction. That breathtaking ring, the ultimate symbol of a sincere love that simply couldn't withstand the demands of the state, was sold for roughly $838,000. The diamond remained flawless, but it became the most tangible remnant of a great history that simply wasn't allowed to happen. While Soraya's giant diamond was a symbol of genuine, sweeping romance, sometimes a massive stone is just a glossy cover for a very strange story. In 1948, on the glamorous French Riviera, Prince Ali Khan presented Hollywood superstar Rita Hayworth with a 12-carat engagement ring. From the outside, it looked like the ultimate movie script, the beautiful, famous film star marrying an immensely wealthy Eastern prince. But, to be completely honest, this union was incredibly odd from the very beginning. It never really promised a fairy tale. Ali Khan had a well-known reputation as an international playboy, and Rita was actually still married to Orson Welles when they first met. In fact, she initially refused the prince's advances altogether. The engagement ring was undeniably spectacular, a bold, fashionable cut perfectly suited for a Hollywood diva. Yet, it's hard not to look at that massive diamond and feel that the glossy, picture-perfect aesthetic was hiding a fundamental mismatch between two completely different worlds. Unsurprisingly, the marriage unraveled quickly. The constant traveling, the relentless glare of the international press, and their entirely different expectations proved too much to handle. By 1953, Rita had secured a divorce in Reno, Nevada, famously citing extreme cruelty. But what makes this story stand out is what happened after the split. The main bargaining chip between them wasn't the massive emerald-cut diamond or the rest of the extravagant jewelry he had given her. The real battle was over their young daughter, Yasmin. The prince reportedly offered Rita a staggering sum of money, essentially a fortune, on the strict condition that Yasmin be raised in the Muslim faith and live with him in Europe. Rita flatly refused. She turned down the enormous financial offer and the royal expectations, absolutely determined to give her daughter an American upbringing. In Rita's case, the glittering diamonds faded into the background when a mother was fighting for her child's future. The size of the stone didn't matter at all. But what happens when an engagement ring is incredibly modest, featuring stones weighing less than a single carat, yet the stakes are the survival of an entire empire? To answer that, we have to travel back to 1796. Long before the grand coronations and the opulent imperial courts, Napoleon Bonaparte was just a promising, though not yet wealthy, young general. He was entirely consumed by his passion for Josephine, and the engagement ring he gave her reflects that deeply intimate beginning. He chose a toi et moi, a you and me style ring. It is a wonderfully delicate piece featuring two pear-shaped stones set side by side on a thin gold band, a blue sapphire and a clear diamond. What is fascinating is that each stone weighs just under a single carat. I actually find the design of this ring incredibly appealing. It has a very elegant, quiet beauty to it. Inside the band, it bears a simple, powerful inscription, Vous et moi, Bonaparte. When you compare it to the giant 20-carat diamonds of the mid-20th century, this ring seems almost impossibly modest. It is such a striking contrast to think about this tiny, fragile band resting on Josephine's finger, while the two of them went on to build an empire that would conquer most of Europe. Their marriage was intensely passionate, documented through Napoleon's fervent letters from his military campaigns. They survived mutual infidelities and political turmoil, eventually being crowned emperor and empress at Notre Dame in 1804. But as the empire expanded, a devastating problem overshadowed their union. Josephine, who had children from a previous marriage, was unable to provide Napoleon with a legitimate heir. By 1809, the survival of the new dynasty demanded a sacrifice. In a formal, incredibly emotional ceremony, the couple agreed to divorce so that Napoleon could marry an Austrian archduchess and secure a successor. The empire had simply outgrown the couple who built it. But the story of this modest little ring has a rather astonishing postscript. More than 2 centuries later, in 2013, the ring surfaced at the Osenat auction house in Fontainebleau. Based purely on the material value of the gold and those 2 small stones, the experts set a pre-sale estimate of just 10,000 to 15,000 euros. The final hammer price, however, sent shockwaves through the room. It sold for 730,000 euros. This colossal leap from the estimate to the final price is, to me, the ultimate proof of what truly makes jewelry special. Its value isn't found in the sheer size of the carats, the brilliance of the cut, or the perfection of the gems. It is the history hidden within that truly matters. That is what gives a jewel its real weight. The buyers in that auction room weren't bidding on a small sapphire and a diamond. They were bidding on a promise of you and I that managed to outlive a painful royal divorce, the collapse of an empire, and 200 years of history. It is so easy to blame the stones when a relationship ends, to look at a failed royal marriage and wonder if the engagement ring was somehow a bad omen. But Princess Anne's story proves that the jewels themselves are completely innocent. Her first romance wasn't born in the glittering ballrooms of Buckingham Palace, but in the rugged, highly competitive world of equestrian sports. In the late 1960s, Anne met Mark Phillips, a fellow elite rider. They bonded deeply over their shared passion for horses. Anne was a European eventing champion, and Mark had won an Olympic gold medal in Munich. It seemed like the ultimate practical, grounded match between two people with identical interests. When they announced their engagement in May 1973, they presented a united, no-nonsense front. They had actually gone to Garrett together that spring to choose the ring, a central, faceted blue sapphire, flanked by a diamond on either side. During their press conference, Anne casually dismissed any grand romantic fuss, simply describing her new ring as pretty simple. It perfectly matched her famously practical personality. They married at Westminster Abbey in front of millions, famously declined any royal titles for Mark or their future children, and settled into what everyone assumed would be a rock-solid, sensible life. But as it turns out, sharing a hobby isn't always enough to sustain a marriage. Over the years, the couple drifted apart, building separate circles and living increasingly parallel lives. The practical union slowly fractured behind closed doors. Mark had relationships outside the marriage, eventually fathering a child with another woman. Meanwhile, Anne found a deep, quiet connection with Commander Timothy Lawrence, who was serving as an equerry to her mother, the Queen. The breaking point for Anne and Mark's marriage was incredibly public and far from the quiet life they had tried to build. In 1989, highly personal letters from Timothy to Anne were stolen from her briefcase and leaked to the British press. The sensible royal marriage ended in a storm of tabloid headlines, culminating in an official separation and, finally, a divorce in April 1992. When Anne married Timothy Lawrence in December of that very same year, in a tiny, quiet Scottish church with just 30 guests, what did her new groom give her? Another sapphire. This time, it was a smooth, dome-shaped cabochon sapphire set in yellow gold with small diamonds on either side. I have to say, I deeply admire this choice. So many people in her position would have completely avoided the stone, thinking, anything but a sapphire, it's bad luck. But Anne didn't obsess over superstitions or let a failed marriage dictate her future. She stayed entirely true to her own taste. Her story is such a brilliant, grounding reminder that rings do not carry curses. The stones are completely innocent. One marriage might not work out, but a second one can be wonderfully, quietly happy. Anne and Timothy have been together for over 30 years now, even with the exact same kind of jewel shining on your hand. Sometimes an engagement ring isn't just chosen in a boutique or commissioned from a jeweler. Occasionally, it is quite literally a piece taken from a larger family heirloom. In 1987, Infanta Elena, the eldest daughter of King Juan Carlos of Spain, met Jaime de Marichalar in Paris. She was studying French literature, and he was working in banking. They managed to keep their relationship out of the spotlight for years, and it wasn't until the autumn of 1994 that the Spanish court finally announced their engagement. During the family presentation at the Zarzuela Palace, Elena showed the press her ring, an elegant diamond teardrop set in platinum. What makes this piece so interesting is its origin. Jaime's family had given the Infanta an antique piece, the Marichalar tiara. The central diamond teardrop of this tiara was designed to be removable, and it was this exact element that was taken off to serve as her engagement ring. I really like this approach. Giving a future bride a central piece of your family's heritage to wear on her hand every day feels very welcoming. It is a tangible, personal way to bring someone into a family's history right from the start. Their wedding in March 1995 was a massive national event, as it was the first royal wedding in Spain in 89 years. When Elena walked down the aisle of Seville Cathedral, she wore the Marichalar tiara, and while the tiara itself looked perfectly complete and balanced on her head, its original central diamond teardrop was shining right there on her finger. It was a very subtle, elegant way to tie her bridal look together. The couple went on to have 2 children, but their marriage eventually faced heartbreaking challenges. In 2001, Jaime suffered a severe stroke. His recovery was long and difficult, and it fundamentally changed their daily lives. Years later, the strain became apparent. In 2007, the royal house issued a very cautious statement announcing a temporary suspension of cohabitation. The distance only grew, and they were officially divorced in 2010, marking the first divorce of a reigning Spanish monarch's child. When an engagement ring is a detached piece of the ex-husband's family tiara, people often wonder what happens to it after a split. Because both the tiara and the ring were given to Elena as a personal wedding gift, they naturally remained hers. She simply kept them, and even wore the tiara to Crown Princess Victoria of Sweden's wedding in June 2010, shortly after her own divorce was finalized. So far, we have talked about marriages that simply couldn't stand the test of time. But sometimes, the fairy tale promised by an engagement ring shatters before the bride even has a chance to put on her wedding dress. The Swedish royal family has exactly this kind of story. In August 2009, King Carl XVI Gustav's youngest daughter, Princess Madeleine, was absolutely glowing. During a summer photo call at Solliden Palace, the court officially announced her engagement to lawyer Jonas Bergström. He had proposed during a holiday in Capri, and the ring he slipped onto her finger was quite striking. It was an emerald-cut diamond on a sparkling pavé band, but what made it so interesting was the setting. The rectangular central stone was placed horizontally. It was a very stylish, modern, and rather unconventional choice for a classic royal engagement. At the time, Jonas told the press how he had fallen for her blue eyes and wonderful laugh, and it seemed like a spectacular wedding was waiting for them in the second half of 2010. But they never made it to the altar. First, the Swedish court postponed the wedding date, citing an overly packed royal schedule. Madeline's older sister, Crown Princess Victoria, was getting married in June of that same year. However, completely different details soon leaked to the press. In the spring of 2010, a Norwegian magazine published an interview with a woman who claimed she had a brief affair with Jonas at an exclusive ski resort. The rumors snowballed, and on April 24, the court released a very dry statement. The engagement was officially broken off, and the couple was going their separate ways. Madeline almost immediately boarded a plane and flew to New York, putting an ocean between herself and the flashing cameras of the paparazzi. You know, in the context of our theme, I actually find this story rather optimistic. Of course, calling off a royal wedding in front of the whole world, especially amidst tabloid cheating scandals, must be incredibly painful. But taking off an engagement ring before the vows are spoken is so much more honest than trying to maintain the illusion of a perfect family just for the sake of royal protocol. That horizontal diamond ring never became a wedding ring, but it served its purpose. It closed a chapter that would have likely turned into a long, unhappy marriage. In New York, Madeline threw herself into her charity work, eventually met financier Christopher O'Neill, and married him. Her second engagement ring, featuring a stunning Asher-cut diamond, is the start of a completely different, happy story. I think it is a brilliant reminder that sometimes breaking an engagement is the best decision you can possibly make. Looking at all these incredible rings, from a massive 20-carat diamond to the most modest sapphire, it is easy to see why we want them to represent a perfect fairy tale. But the reality is always so much more human. When a royal marriage ends, the fate of the ring is as unique as the woman who wears it. Some end up under an auctioneer's hammer, some become quiet family heirlooms, and others are worn proudly into a new, independent chapter of life. If these stories show us anything, it is that the stones themselves are completely innocent. They don't carry curses, and they certainly cannot guarantee a happily ever after. They simply capture a moment in time, silently holding on to history long after the initial promises have faded. I would love to know which of these stories resonated with you the most. Would you continue wearing a beautiful engagement ring after a divorce? Or would you prefer to put it away? Let me know in the comments. I always enjoy reading your perspectives. If you liked this video, please leave a like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss our next conversations. Thank you so much for spending your time with me today, and I will see you in the next one.